Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah from GRC World Forums, and today we have a session on driving value from your privacy investments. If you have any questions throughout the session, please submit them using the chat box and we will aim to answer these towards the end. This webinar is also being recorded and will be available on demand. Presenting today's webinar is Ben Weikart, Solutions Lead at Ketch. I'd now like to hand this over to Ben to start us off with today's webinar.
Perfect. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone, for joining. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm Ben Weikart, and I'm joined by Josh Grossman, and we're both at Ketch, a data privacy and data governance company. And I work on our strategic solutions team. Josh runs our CX practice, our customer success group. And we're both working with customers really every day on evolving their privacy programs, driving greater maturity of their privacy programs, and driving value from those privacy investments. And so we've developed really a framework, a set of best practices, a set of tools that we're leveraging with our customers every day to help them maximize those investments. And that's really the conversation that we want to have today. So as we get into some of the goals, we'll actually start by discussing some of the challenges that we're seeing when privacy professionals are trying to maximize the value of their program, drive greater adoption. And we'll talk about some strategies to surmount some of those challenges. We'll talk about some time-honored approaches that Josh and I have used for many years now, both in privacy, and we both worked at a previous company that was more focused on MarTech and AdTech. And a hypothesis we had that has proven to be true is that there's certain things that we need to do in terms of driving alignment, driving collaboration, getting people marching in the same direction that transcend any specific type of technology. And we found that to absolutely be the case here in privacy. So we're excited to share some of those frameworks. And then we'll actually quantify the value of some of those top use cases that we're seeing that really drive the most holistic and broad organizational benefits. It really drives value for different stakeholders across the organization. Please ask questions throughout. We're monitoring the question bank, as Sarah had mentioned, but we also have some time at the end for QA. And I just wanted to start with some data. And so these are data from Forrester taken at the tail end of last year, so it's very fresh. And the question that they asked was, what is your organization's top strategic privacy priority? And what I love about the data, if you look at it, is that really it's about customer experience. It's about better insights, better business decision making. If you look at some of these top answers, increasing customer trust in the brand, better aligning to business goals and strategy, better supporting business decision making, and promoting customer engagement. So fundamentally, organizations know there is so much value with a modern privacy program that transcends some of the traditional things that we think about when we think about privacy. The next question they asked was specific around, what are your organization's biggest challenges? What are the things that are getting in the way of that greater adoption of these privacy programs? And this is where some of those, what we call legacy mindset, some of that baggage that unfortunately is a part of how some people think about privacy programs. You see this idea that privacy has a negative impact on customer experience, or that privacy actually inhibits or limits innovation, or unless I'm in a legal role, it's not really something that I need to think about, right? It's mainly a legal task, or I have other risks that are more important. So I'm not going to commit resources and time to that privacy program. And so an approach that Josh and I have had a lot of success with, and this is a refrain and a maxim that we've started using here at Ketch, is don't make other stakeholders learn privacy or speak privacy. Show them how privacy can solve some of their challenges, solve some of their goals. And so we are talking to data folks all the time, people that are reliant on data to do their roles. These could be marketing folks, these could be analytics folks. And so a lot of the playbook, as folks know, is being rewritten, right? A lot of the traditional sources of data are going dry. I think third-party cookie deprecation gets the most attention. And so this is where things get really interesting, where we can start to say, well, how would privacy solve for that, right? And so this idea of developing a fully permissioned zero or first-party data asset, where the organization is seeking hand raisers that want to voluntarily share data, information with the brand. People are only going to do that if they feel that they can trust the brand, if they feel that they can trust the company. So hugely important privacy angle there. We know that IT spends an inordinate amount of time servicing legacy tech debt. Part of that is trying to re-architect or re-engineer the technology stack to be privacy compliant. So a modern privacy program allows you to actually take your permissions, take that consented data, and bring it to the technology where it lives, versus having to totally re-architect that entire environment. That 33% stat comes from Gartner. And then we know in general, and there's lots of trust indices and trust barometers that look at this, but I think Edelman is probably the most famous. This idea of just in general, there's declining trust in brands from the perspective of the consumer. And so we know, and there's a lot of data now, and we'll look at some of it today, this idea that responsible data practices, things like data minimization, transparency, control, helps build deeper trust, helps build deeper customer relationships. So again, this idea that the privacy program can solve a lot of the goals, KPIs, and challenges that a lot of our stakeholders have across the organization. And Josh, I know you and I are always talking about this, and almost from the perspective of how does legal better partner with the business to unlock greater value. Just curious if you can share a perspective on some of the things you're seeing as you work with, our clients across the board.
Yeah, I would just say that, what we see is there's starting to be a paradigm shift with our customers and prospects. And it's really around this idea that privacy delivers more than just compliance. I think historically it was just a compliance tick, but that realization that collecting better data more transparently means better customer engagement. And there's a need to manage that data in an ethical way that also builds trust with customers. Ultimately, that's what's unlocking business value for stakeholders, for our customers. And I would say that realization in itself has been the main driver for more strategic collaboration between legal and business teams.
Totally. And Josh, I see this in the world I live in. Curious if you see it too. I'm seeing this across companies, large and small, and across different verticals, right? So would you say this is kind of a universal thing you're seeing as you talk to all of our customers?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, cool. Well, thanks for sharing that perspective. Generally, when we're talking about what is the value of a modern privacy program and all these really cool things that the privacy program can do, the refrain or the question I get asked is, that's really cool. That's exciting. How the heck do I get there, right? I'm looking at my privacy program today, and maybe we're just capturing consent on the website, kind of cookie consent, or we're doing some things around assessments. How do I get from point A to point Z? And so what Josh and I have developed alongside with our customers is really a framework, a set of steps that we can pursue to really build and scale and evolve a great privacy program. And so it all starts with this idea of socializing the North Star vision. And it's kind of funny, if you work in MarTech or AdTech or customer service, this idea of what's the North Star vision? What's the thing that gets all of us excited and marching in the same direction is pervasive. That language is used all the time. When I started working in privacy, I never heard that idea of a North Star vision. So I think that's hugely important. What is that exciting thing that's going to get IT and analytics and data and marketing all aligned? So we'll start there. But once you establish that North Star vision, and these two steps can happen in tandem, figuring out who are those core stakeholders, who are those people that are really important, that we want to get their buy-in, we want to get their commitment of time and resources to grow this program. Part of that is benchmarking the program. And that's such an important step that I think is often missed. The benchmark is really, let's draw a line in the sand and say, where are we today? What are the strengths and the weaknesses and the opportunities that we have? And so we've developed a diagnostic that we use with our customers all the time around benchmarking, and we'll show you that today. I think it's so critical, and it's a shame that more companies aren't doing that today. Once you have that benchmark assessment, we start brainstorming the different use cases. We start brainstorming the different KPIs. And really, we're looking for use cases that deliver broad value. And I love certain privacy use cases that deliver value to legal, deliver value to marketing, deliver value to technology. And so we'll unpack some of those use cases today. From there, we figure out where do we want to start? What is that primary use case or those primary two use cases that we're going to roll with? And then we evolve into the broader roadmap, iterating and evolving that roadmap. So this is the approach that we work with our customers all the time. And this is really the lion's share of the content that we'll discuss today. So I mentioned starting with this idea of the North Star vision, and different companies will have different North Star visions. But what I really love seeing, and I'm seeing this from McKinsey and Forrester and Gartner, and we've done our own research as well, here at Ketch is the idea that privacy is one of the best ways that an organization can build really strong, durable relationships with customer. And McKinsey calls it digital trust. They did a big survey back in September of last year. And what they were trying to do is say, let's quantify the value of building these deeper relationships with customers around responsible data practices in particular. And so they called that idea digital trust. And so digital trust from the perspective of a consumer looking at the brand is confidence in that brand or that company to protect my data, provide transparency around how my data is used, how it's used in conjunction with AI, and then offer trustworthy products and services. And what they found is that companies that really embellish and really practice digital trust can increase top and bottom line performance by 10%, which is a huge number compared to their peer set. They got even deeper with the data and they said, what is the value? What is the importance of having a trusted reputation, which they defined as data protections and the amount of data required? Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as data minimization to complete a transaction. How important are those two dimensions when it comes to a purchase decision versus the usual suspects, versus things like price, description, how quickly do I receive the product or service? And I was really surprised how important, how much consumers value those two dimensions highlighted there in purple versus some of the other things like convenience and description and price. So it's hugely important. Customers increasingly really care about this when they're making a decision to do business with a company. The other thing that I really love about this research is they looked at the intersection of these responsible data practices and the customer journey, which I hadn't seen done before. And what they found is that these responsible data practices, building digital trust, is important for acquiring new customers. It's also really important for keeping existing customers. So from a business getting perspective on the acquisition side, over half of people make sure that that company has a strong reputation for protecting customer data. And then 40% of respondents, and I think this was about 3,300 global respondents, had admitted leaving a company that they had done business with, that they were a customer to, if they were misaligned with their data practices or they felt that they weren't protective with how they were managing customer data. So a huge argument for why privacy is so important. It's such an imperative. And so this is one example of a North Star vision. What I generally do with our customers is use this as a baseline and then tweak and evolve and say, well, how is your business similar or dissimilar from this example? But that's a fundamentally important thing that we're doing every day with customers to build that groundswell and build that excitement for the privacy program. So that's step one. From there, we start thinking about aligning the stakeholders. Who are the folks that are going to be critical to the success of this program? And this isn't exhaustive, but generally the roles that we're seeing are legal, of course, increasingly technology roles, and then anyone that's reliant on data to power their role. So that could be folks in marketing, it could be folks in analytics, it could be folks in data science, right? There's a lot of folks that are really reliant on data. But what we're trying to do is fundamentally understand, what are you trying to accomplish in your goal? What does a privacy win look like for you? And then build out that broader story. And so when we're talking to legal, one of the refrains we hear more and more is this idea of moving beyond these false dichotomies, this idea of I have to choose. I can either have complete compliance, I can be really buttoned up from a regulatory perspective, or I can have an elegant customer experience, or I can grow through data. So this idea of moving beyond the dichotomy and really legal never wanting to be the office of no. We want to enable the business. We want to go on offense. We want to do all these great things to grow the brand. And so when we're talking about privacy wins for legal, oftentimes the conversation really centers around, I can't scale this legal guidance. So how do I codify that guidance and actually get it into the DNA of the company, into the tech, into the data layer? Increasingly, people will know this as trust by design or privacy by design. The other thing that we're hearing all the time, this idea of shifting to legal offense. So a lot of the legacy privacy programs have encumbered legal, and legal ends up doing a lot of things manually. The more we can automate, the more we can free up time, and this is a big focus of our conversations, to work on anything that makes the company money, negotiating a new contract, bringing a new partner on board, whatever the case may be. And then in addition to traditional risk management and risk mitigation, all the time we're seeing across companies, legal being tasked with really implementing these broad, holistic data responsibility initiatives. So of course, legal's always worked cross-functionally, but even more so to drive these big kind of meaty initiatives across the organization. And so these are all actual quotes of our customers, I should have said earlier. When we're talking to tech folks, and this is a quote from one of our media companies, customers, this idea of the privacy tax comes up a lot. If you don't have an efficient program, what ends up happening is people have to manually run the day-to-day operations of the program. And so that's that idea of a privacy tax. And so this quote, look, we're looking at all the new regs, we're looking at all the new guidance. The last thing we want to do is build this army of developers and engineers to tackle this growing privacy legislation. So you see that privacy win, the first bullet is actually the exact same. It's just the other side of the coin. How do we operationalize and scale this guidance into the tech, into the data, so that my teams don't have to manually run these programs, find this data, do these audits, manually manage code and tags on the website for each new regulation. We also know that if we don't do this right, these teams end up having to re-architect all of the systems to be data privacy compliant. And so there's something kind of magical, and we don't see it all the time, but when we do, it is so apparent, where when you have your technology team and you have your legal team working together, just creating the preconditions for a really successful program. And those are the programs that really tend to evolve very, very quickly and reach some of those higher levels of maturity. And Josh, I know we talk all the time about this magic dance between tech and legal. I'm just curious if you can share a perspective here in terms of when you're seeing this relationship work really well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're in the age of a privacy transformation of sorts. I mean, I think everybody understands, and you've stated it, modern businesses require data to innovate. And laws, they're not just a legal problem, okay? You can't just solve them by updating your privacy policy. So our customers understand that to do privacy right, you need to solve the challenges around managing data. We're seeing an evolution from paper-based to data-driven privacy compliance. So, we're seeing a greater need for collaboration across legal, IT, data teams to really fully solve today's challenges. I would say another observation that I'm seeing in the field is that, legal teams that have, some ad tech background, some data background can make a big difference in the success of the program. So I think cross-pollinating knowledge between legal and technology teams is really key to driving value throughout the program.
Yeah, that's such a good point, right? I've seen so many teams where they're spending the majority of their time just on the translation. Like, what do you mean when you say that? And what does that actually mean from a technology perspective? And if you can kind of get through that more quickly, then you can actually work on some of the strategic initiatives and what are we trying to do for customers and how does that connect, legal and technology. So I think that idea of getting some cross-pollination is hugely important and something that we're seeing in a lot of our most successful customers. So thanks for making that point. Perfect. And then, one of the final stakeholders that we're seeing more and more, and we've seen them for a while, but we're really starting to see them in a lot of engagements now, is marketing. And again, I'm using marketing as anyone that's really reliant on data to complete their job. And so this quote I love, this idea of, look, I don't own privacy, but I absolutely have to abide by it. My goal is just to not have privacy get in the way of these very ambitious digital goals that I have. And that was a senior director of digital that we're working with. And so generally when we're talking to marketing folks and they're interested in the privacy program, it's really around how can I acquire more of that first party or zero party data through things like the value exchange, through things like building deeper relationships and having more transparency over those data practices so that people trust that brand and are more willing to share. This idea of improved data utility and ROI is hugely important. Talking to a lot of marketers today at a lot of different departments saying, we're kind of on pins and needles. We're not sure if we have the right consent or the right permissions to leverage this data. And frankly, we're a little nervous. We don't want to make a misstep. We don't want to inadvertently use data in a way that we don't have the right consent and get the organization in trouble or expose us to more risk. So this idea of shifting toward a fully permissioned, fully consented data asset as a way to improve data ROI and data utility is hugely important. So just hopefully that's helpful in terms of, some of your peers in these different roles, how you might approach them when it comes to the role of privacy and how privacy can unlock value in their specific roles. Once we have those different stakeholders, we're very fastidious about this. We think it's super important. We do a baseline assessment. And the assessment is meant to just understand, where is the program today? Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? And the reason it's so important is because it's a unifier. It gets us all marching in the same direction, speaking the same language. And so when we think about privacy and the evolution of a program, we really think about it across a couple core dimensions: operations, data, risk, and technology. Those first four I tend to think as internal, and then customer trust. So that's really the customer facing. How are we communicating our responsible data practices back to that customer to build brand loyalty? And so just to unpack these a little bit for folks, when we're talking about operations, it's things like collaboration, right? Do we have a holistic approach across privacy? Have we have stakeholders connected their own role-specific KPIs back to the privacy program? Do we have the right processes? Do we have things like a privacy center of excellence that get people, again, on the same page? Is the organization designed in a way to facilitate these cross-functional engagements? And then do we have a roadmap, right? Do we know where this privacy program is going to be in 6, 9, or 12 months? And we've all committed to that roadmap. So that's how we think about ops. When we think about data, we're thinking about consent. Do we have the right consent flags? Not just when we acquire data, but as it flows across the organization. Same with permissions. Are we capturing and using data in a way in accordance with local regs? How we maximize that data utility? And then are we practicing strong data governance, where we have visibility across data, across the lifecycle, and we have some scalable and enforceable minimization and retention policies? When we're thinking about risk, it's really about visibility, right? So is my visibility into risk static the last time we did a survey, or is it real time? Do I know where that risk is? Have I minimized these risk blind spots? Do we have a good way to prioritize where risk exists in the business? Do we have strong enforcement? So we have the ability to trigger the various assessments, and we've mapped those assessments to the responsible individuals based on logic and roles. So that's all happening automatically. And then do we have a good view of risk into third parties? Technology is maybe one of the more straightforward ones. Do we have a large degree of automation, or things really rote, right? Is it really hard to kind of manage the day-to-day operations because it's so taxing from a manual perspective? Are we agile? Can we quickly adapt to new and evolving guidance and regulations? Do we have scale? And then do we have some kind of identity management? So when someone shares consent, it's not just limited to an email address, right? And we can say, okay, this person on this phone, on this device is the same person, and you can federate that across all of those different systems. So again, those four I largely think of as internal. I think what's missing from a lot of the conversation, although increasingly we're seeing this be a focus, is the idea of the customer and building deeper trust. Are we transparent with our policies? Does the customer have some agency, some control? Are we minimizing data and just gathering the data that we need for the required purpose? And is the way we approach privacy relatable? Does it make sense? Is it buried in legalese, or can someone comb through this and actually understand what we're doing with their data? So what we do is we do the benchmark. We do the assessment with our customers. We understand where those scores are high, where they're low, and then we give them an aggregate score. And we say, okay, you're a 2, or you're a 1, or you're a 4. And then based on those scores, we're able to very intelligently, based on data, say, okay, we really think you should prioritize your data strategy, or improving the way you manage third-party risk, or driving greater automation. Whatever the case may be, you've got the data. And this is really important. You'll see as we continue to evolve the roadmap to benchmark and score against some of these dimensions. So Josh, I know we're increasingly doing this with our customers, and just curious if you have a perspective in terms of, are some of these dimensions, are you seeing more or less aligned to certain roles, or are you seeing the dimensions kind of change as the program moves through maturity, a very basic program versus a program that's maybe more sophisticated?
Yeah, I would say broadly speaking, I mean, compliance is still, compliance and risk mitigation is really the number one goal for, especially for new customers setting up privacy programs, because that just represents, low hanging fruit. But as we've mentioned before, as the program evolved, I mean, there's these other areas in increased brand trust, operational efficiencies, maximizing data assets. Those types of use cases and those types of maturity curves are really that where an additional amount of value can be driven. So, I mean, a strong privacy program, it can really evolve into a competitive differentiator if you consider some of these other aspects.
Yeah, hugely so, right? And I'm seeing the same stuff where I think, especially when we get those broader stakeholder, folks that maybe didn't come up through legal or compliance or privacy roles, they really come into the conversation just saying, we're just going to be talking about risk mitigation. And then you do something like this and it's, I don't even know people were thinking, like this. And so just by virtue of going through the process, I think there's a lot of education. And I've seen people get kind of excited and say, oh, like never connected those dots, but that makes sense. Let me learn more. And then they show up in the next meeting, So it serves, in addition to just having that baseline score, I think just building that groundswell and socializing the value of what the privacy program can deliver is almost a secondary or tertiary benefit we see when we do these. So.
Hey, Ben, this is Colleen from the Ketch team here. Folks, I've been in the chat saying hello. So hi to everyone online. As you guys were talking through those sections, I popped a couple questions in the polls for the audience to see what people are thinking. So if you are on and you haven't popped over to that poll panel, please do. We'd love to hear your feedback. But I asked about, what's the state of privacy program collaboration in your organization? Is it great speaking with marketing and IT regularly, work in progress, or really still solely a legal responsibility? And overwhelmingly 64% of folks said it's a work in progress. Collab is getting better. Does that mimic, Ben, what you're seeing when you speak with most clients?
100%. And even when I started doing this work a while back, there was actually, people would bristle. There was pushback that, oh, trust, no, we really don't think that's a marketing thing. You're trying to take credit. You're trying to do too much with privacy. I never hear that anymore. I either hear, oh, that's interesting. Let's explore that. Or, yeah, we've had a couple conversations around that. Maybe people are warming up a little bit. So I think that idea of work in progress is definitely what we're seeing. I'm not seeing a ton of great yet, but I think we'll get there fairly soon. And that's what really keeps us excited, because I know that's the promised land and I know we'll get there. So.
Awesome. Yeah, only one response of all the respondents said, so it's solely legal, not collaborating with anyone. So it's great to see most people are getting some buy-in. Yeah. And then as you were just going through those 5 privacy assessment categories, I asked the audience here, of these 5 components, what do you feel is going to be the most challenging for your organization? And 2 clear, I guess, winners or losers, however you want to term that. Operations and technology, people fare the most challenging categories. Does that surprise you? What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think ops, yes, that one makes sense to me. It's in having done MarTech and AdTech and customer service, that generally is the hardest dimension I've seen, because you really need to get people aligned, and people are busy, they have competing priorities. And so I feel like ops is hugely important. And it also is a challenge. I think the more data we have, that McKinsey stat I just showed, Forrester's got something similar, Gartner's got something similar. We've done research on this. So there's this huge body of work now that I honestly don't think we had even 6-8 months ago, that really makes the case for why this is so important. And those are all easy to find, and we're happy to share those links out. I think let that body of work, let that research draft on the cachet of those brands to help make the case for, yeah, this is something I need to prioritize. This is, I do want to build a process around this, or we should rethink, the way we design the org to take advantage of this, because we don't want to miss the opportunity. Because if we don't, and our competitor does in that same space, we might have a problem. The technology perspective is interesting. There is some great new tech, and what we're seeing in privacy is you have a lot of kind of the legacy privacy tech that was pretty manual, but really kind of solved the problem of the day. We're seeing a lot of, and there's a little self-serving, kind of next gen tech that has more focus on automation, more focus on programmatic approaches that really give us a lot more time back Fundamentally, that's what we're talking about. You can automate a lot of these routine and rote activities. That's time back for legal, that's time back for marketing, that's time back for technology. And I think the companies that are starting to explore that space and adopt some of those next gen techniques are really saying, wow, now we have some more time back. What is that next strategic thing that we want to tackle? So that one absolutely is surmountable, which is great. So thanks for calling those two out, ops and tech.
Love it. Thanks, Ben.
Awesome. Cool. So at this point, we've got a North Star vision. Maybe we built it off the McKinsey, but we've made it, research, but we've kind of made it salient to our brand. We figured out our stakeholders. We've got our benchmark score. We know where we're strong. We know where we're weak. We've got an idea of some of the things that we want to tackle. This is where figuring out, okay, what are the right use cases? Where should we really be focusing out of the gate, but also as we evolve the program? And what specifically are the KPIs? How are we going to measure success? And so we need some kind of way, some kind of framework to take those scores and map them to some kind of trajectory that the entire organization can share and understand and debate and have a dialogue. And so what we've developed is this idea of, we call it the privacy maturity curve, but basically it's a stepping stone. It's a series of levels of maturity. And the way that we think about this, we really start with the two different axes. So this idea of people coordination on the y-axis. What is the reality of the privacy program today? Is it really siloed in a specific department? Is it really cross-functional? I would say that's kind of aligned with the work in progress, Colleen, that you were saying here a second ago. Or is it really kind of C-suite or board level priority? Generally, when it's at that CXO level, what we're seeing is it's less the privacy program per se. It's more that the company has a big initiative around trust and building deeper trust with customers or consumers. And the privacy program ends up being the vehicle that they're going to use to deliver on those trust initiatives. So that's how we tend to see that playing out. On the x-axis, really, it's what's the focus of the program and how are we thinking about the value of data and the role of data? Is it a risk to be mitigated, or is it something that's incredibly valuable that we're going to use to leverage growth? So as we work with our customers and we start to do these assessments and figure out, are you a level 1, a level 2, a level 3? I'll unpack these. Generally, when we're talking about level 1, this is what we call programs. And the orientation here is really around basic compliance or check the box on compliance. You'll hear that a lot. We really just want to meet the minimal conditions to make sure we're compliant. So generally what you're seeing is cookie consent capture on the website, and then assessments, kind of manual assessments. The problem that we're seeing with organizations is very quickly within programs, when things are more manual and less automated, with just the sheer scale of the new regs and the guidance and all the things to keep up on, it's kind of untenable. People are just running out of bodies and time to just manually do all this. And it's not the best use of people's resources, right? Just managing day-to-day operations manually. So because of that, we're seeing more and more companies really want to adopt a more programmatic approach, this idea of level 2. And when I think about programmatic, I really think about it across two dimensions. One dimension is, let's bring in those technology partners. Let's automate larger swaths of the program. So there's a huge efficiency play. A lot of our customers are seeing an 80% reduction in just the day-to-day costs of running these programs by virtue of taking a more programmatic or automated approach. So that's half of it. The other half of it is on the data ROI. And the big shift, the big shift between level 1 and level 2 is moving from just capturing consent on a digital property to, in level 2, actually orchestrating that consent across your entire ecosystem. So if I change my consent on the website, making sure that that's reflected in a marketing system or an advertising system or a service system or whatever the case may be. That's hugely important because it builds trust with customers, but also it improves data utility, which we were talking about earlier. And folks say, we're confident in the status of our data, that we have the right consent, we have the right permission. So we're going to explore and experiment with that data and activate it and put it in the CDP and all of those different use cases that a lot of companies, frankly, are quite nervous about. So again, level 2, a ton of value there in terms of efficiency and really maximizing the value of your data.
Speaking of that data flow, we have a great question in the chat here. When you go through the assessment process with customers, how does it compare the average volume of data companies believe they're managing versus what they actually have? Do you find customers are surprised by the volume of data?
all the time. Of course, yeah. I think for a lot of companies, they don't realize how much data, the sprawling data ecosystem, especially when you start putting things in cloud and people say, oh my God, I didn't know we had data here and there. So I think more than anything, it's a really eye-opening kind of exercise. And people say, God, we haven't just sat down and talked about this across all of these different teams, all of these different functions. So I would say more often than not, almost exclusively, it's always, wow, we have so much data all over the place. We really need to get a handle on this because one, there's a risk factor, of course, if you're not succinctly managing your data asset. But two, there's a foregone opportunity, right? There's an opportunity cost of not knowing, oh, I had data in that system that we have the right consent and permissions for. We should activate that data. So it's kind of interesting from both a risk mitigation perspective and a growth perspective, really getting a handle on how are we managing our data asset, and visibility into data is something that comes up a lot in these conversations on that data dimension. That's a really good question. Josh, any thoughts on that as well? Or are you, I mean, that's what I'm seeing when I talk to customers. I imagine you're seeing kind of the same thing as you kind of really get in.
Yeah, but it's not just it's not just internal data assets. It's also like what kind of pixels are you running on your website, right? Totally. And are those pixels calling other pixels? Because essentially that's data being sent to third parties that you need to account for. And you go to some websites and you'll see hundreds of tags on their websites. And that usually tells me that, maybe they're not, don't have a handle on it as much as they maybe should.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like the takeaway there is like, it's an eye-opening thing pretty much. And people, oh, never thought about that almost universally, especially on the data asset, but really across the dimensions. It's a great question. Awesome. Okay, so I think we hit programmatic. Data stewardship is really this idea of making privacy a competitive advantage. And again, those ideas of those responsible data practices, right? Minimization, transparency, control, retention policies, all that good stuff. We did a similar research study that bore out similar results. What we found is that when brands have those responsible data practices, on average, we saw a 23% increase in purchase intent here in the US. For our global audience, it was actually 28%. For UK respondents. So a lot of similar, we're all doing different studies that maybe ask a slightly different question, but directionally, they're all telling us the same thing, that this is hugely important. And one of the easiest ways you can really differentiate, well, not the easiest, but a really critical way that you can differentiate your brand and really build those deep, durable customer relationships. So that's how we think about the different levels. I wanted to just go through again, I promised I would do this, and just unpack what are some of the use cases that we're seeing? What is the technology that we're actually talking about within any different level? And then what is the business value? So generally, when we're talking about programs, we're talking about, gosh, is there a better way to do assessments? We're doing all of these manual assessments. We've talked to some companies that are doing 150 DPIAs a month, and it's a nightmare. They're doing spreadsheets or they're using a survey tool. So there's got to be a better way. We're also talking about consent capture. So making sure that we're at least capturing consent on the websites. Now, we're big fans of consent orchestration if that hasn't been apparent, but generally in programs, this is what we're talking about. When we're talking to stakeholders and saying, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the value? Well, certainly it's risk mitigation. We want to make sure we're compliant. We want to mitigate any kind of operational or financial penalties. What I found really interesting is the financial penalty does not seem to be the driver as much as I thought it would be. What people are really nervous about or is really kind of the driver here is more on the operational side and these consent decrees. I think most people will be familiar with the one from Better Health a couple of weeks ago. As I understand it, and I know we've got some experts on the call here, I think it's 20 years of certain activity, corrective behavior, having to do certain audits, that ends up being the penalty. That seems to come up a lot more in our conversations, and not wanting to lose agency and control over how the organization manages data versus a certain fine at a certain dollar amount. So for what it's worth, that's been kind of a big topic of discussion in the last couple months. From our perspective, we're huge fans of bringing automation into the program, driving a much greater level of efficiency. And so generally the use cases and the solutions here, this idea of moving beyond just capturing consent to orchestrating consent across the entire data ecosystem. Again, that's super important to make sure that you're not leveraging data inadvertently in a way that you don't have the right consent or permissions, but it's also that data utility play, having confidence that we've got the right handle on the way we're managing data, and then using that data for activation and experimentation, analytics, and all that good stuff. Automating DSRs, especially for some companies are getting hundreds, many companies are getting thousands of DSRs. Gartner pegged that at 1,500 per. So very, very quickly, there's a very easy business case on automating DSRs. Marketing preferences is really interesting, and this world has really started to come an overlap with the privacy world. This idea of we're capturing all this marketing data, this first-party data. We want to capture the privacy dimension as well, so that we can continue to leverage that data, continue to activate that data. So we're seeing a lot of marketing folks and data folks come together around this idea of marketing preferences and future-proofing the data they're capturing. And then doing data discovery and classification. So instead of a manual kind of point in time, there's a better way to do this. I want a real-time view of where my risk is, of my data assets, and adopting more of a machine learning and an automated approach. I mentioned this earlier, the value of these solutions collectively, there's a huge cost takeout by having something much more automated. And then just on the data side, increasing data quality and data utility and data ROI. Those are kind of the two sides of the house. And then the final one, and I alluded to this earlier, just this idea of data stewardship and really building a brand, building a reputation on these responsible data practices. And Josh, I know you and I have talked about this all the time. You really feel it when the company is taking responsible data practices and privacy seriously at the executive level, and it's trickling down the organization. And we see that with some brands versus I think in other companies when we're talking to, we're really kind of bottom up trying to get the organization to care about privacy, especially at that executive level. And just curious if you can share a perspective in terms of, what you're seeing when it's really working well and you are getting, the executive level committed and supporting and driving some of these different trust and privacy initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, I think, GDPR and CCPA, it really gave legal teams a reason to bring privacy to the board in the first place. It was somewhat niche before, right? Now it's like, this is important. We have to do that. There's no looking back. Consumers know that if they don't treat my data well, there's no way I'm going to get, trust that particular brand, right? So obviously it helps if you have an aligned philosophy, and it starts in the C-suite, and it starts with, if you believe that data privacy is a fundamental human right. If you believe that managing customer data in an ethical manner can lead to better engagement and loyalty. And if you believe that privacy and security needs to be front and center in any product or service you offer, you can really start to build a culture of data stewardship. And look, you can do the right thing by your customers and also do fun things with data, if you do it the right way. And that's what our customers are doing, right? And we talk a lot about building trust with customers, but it's also about building trust internally between legal, business, IT. But you have to demonstrate value to them, right? Help them get the data they want and need, and you can start to build an alliance.
Love it. And you hit on that point from earlier, right? Where it's like, we have to just as an industry move beyond these false dichotomies, right? We wholeheartedly do not buy into this idea that you have to pick one or the other. Yeah, you have to be responsible with data. You have to be compliant, but you should use that data for growth and experimentation and do really cool things and build the brand relationship. So I love that you hit on that. One of the other things you said is something that one of our customers mentioned, that this idea that trust comes in on foot. It's really hard to build. It takes a long time, but it leaves on horseback, right? So it's really, really easy to lose. So I think that's why this is so important. And then my favorite quote was, privacy is just the air we breathe. This is something that unifies us. This is something that we fundamentally all believe in. We're all singing on the same song sheet. And so those are the kinds of things that I think really kind of start at the top and trickle down. And when you feel it, when you see it, you're just seeing these programs drive much more adoption more rapidly. So thanks for making those points. Cool. So hopefully this is helpful. And if you're tracking along, we've got our North Star vision, we've got our stakeholders, we've benchmarked the program. We're starting to think about, okay, what is kind of the universe of use cases? We've talked about the value. This is where we want to develop that first phase. Where do we want to start? And what I always say is, oh my gosh, if something's broken, if you're getting 1 billion DSRs, yes, do that first. But short of that, if you're trying to just evolve the program and continue to develop and mature the program, what I'm generally looking for is what are those use cases that drive broad collective value, that are going to give value to someone in a legal role, a tech role, or a marketing role. Where I've seen this not work, and more so in other industries, I haven't really seen this in privacy yet, but if we pick a use case that really just plays to one stakeholder, what can end up happening is those other stakeholders are kind of looking around and saying, well, I was excited about this, but this first use case or the second use case or the third release, it's not really doing it for me. And they end up almost emotionally unsubscribing from the program. They don't say, hey, I'm out, but they don't come to meetings, or you lose steam. And it's really, really hard, at least in my experience, to get them back. So I'm always looking for use cases where I can say, you get a win, you get a win, you get a win, and then that snowballs, and then that builds to the next use case. And what I love about privacy is these use cases are really broad, and they really do cut across and provide value to different stakeholders. So something like consent orchestration, right? Orchestrating those consent signals across the ecosystem, and I'll just blow this out. From a legal perspective, well, gosh, that's great, because that helps me manage and mitigate risk, because it's unlikely that someone's going to inadvertently or accidentally use data in a way that we don't have the right consent or we don't have the right permissions. Tech loves that because they don't have to go and build a bunch of APIs into all of these different systems or try to manually map the consent from the consumer into all those downstream systems. And I've said it a bunch today, marketing loves it because, hey, we've got great data. I can, share data with a different department. We can do cross-sell, upsell, and that's going to help improve the utility and the ROI of that data. So consent orchestration, we just love, and we're rolling it out with our customers all the time. Data discovery is another great one. So data discovery, this idea of moving beyond just kind of a manual audit or a manual kind of cataloging exercise, and actually using machine learning and automation to say, what is the data ecosystem? Where is sensitive data? How do I prioritize, the risk associated with that data across that landscape? Well, legal loves it because I'm moving away from these blind spots and I have more of a real-time view of where that risk exists. Tech, you'll see some similar things, right? I don't have to do these manual audits as often. I don't have to do these manual cataloging projects. So there's a huge time savings there for tech. And then marketing, this one's kind of interesting. This is actually something a customer brought to us. We had a customer, and this is actually akin to the question that was asked earlier around data. And do you find more data? A data discovery project actually uncovered a lot of data that the marketing team didn't know about, or it was a different marketing team that had acquired that data. And they said, oh, we have the right permissions, we have the right consent. Let's actually explore this data and do some campaigns and do some activation. So data discovery, another one where you're mitigating risk, you're driving growth, you're driving more operational efficiency into the business. And then the final one, and we're doing this one a lot in terms of automating DSRs, kind of automating the entirety of that DSR process, moving beyond these manual or rote workflows. Legal loves that because a lot of times what we find with data ownership is it's very tribal, and people don't necessarily know who owns what data. So it becomes a Herculean task trying to figure out, hey, someone's asked for their data to be rectified or deleted or recalled. We don't even know how to do that, right? Or that person's moved on to a different role or whatever the case may be. So it mitigates risk. Tech, of course, doesn't have to manually do all this work. And then marketing, this one I found was really interesting. And I never thought about it like this until a different customer brought it up to us. This idea of a feedback loop. So if I'm doing a marketing campaign, I want to know the success, but I also want to know, when am I unsuccessful? What people historically have measured is opt-out rates or unsubscribe rates. We were talking to a marketing team that said, actually, sometimes people will actually ask to have their data deleted on the back of a marketing campaign. That's a really powerful feedback loop that wasn't the right segmentation to that target audience. So if you get a little creative with how you're thinking about these broad use cases, you start to see a lot of different value to these different stakeholders, which again, as I mentioned, is so important for maintaining that momentum, that forward push to drive greater adoption. The final point I want to make is putting it all together with that broader roadmap. And so we're gonna bring it all together here. And so this idea of that privacy maturity curve. So this is a simplified view. We've got those same dimensions. You take that benchmark score, that assessment. Remember that company was a 2.2. And then we start to bring over those use cases. And maybe the first use case is around automating DSRs. What we're doing with our customers, and I would hugely recommend this to all of you, is take an assessment, take that benchmark, again, with those same stakeholders after that use case has been implemented. And you'll find that these use cases will affect a lot of the dimensions. We've just called one out to make the point. So of course, if you move from something manual to something automated, you've got greater scale, you've got greater agility, of course, you've got greater automation. Take that score again. That score will increase. And what the importance of that score increasing is that will get people excited. That will prove momentum. That will show the ROI of these investments, not just in tech, but in people's time, in resources. And then maybe you bring in consent orchestration. And so obviously that's going to have a huge impact in terms of the way you're managing data governance, the way you're doing flow downs with consent across that data ecosystem, and the utility of that data. And take that assessment again, right? So now we're at 2.6. And then that final use case around data discovery that we were just talking about, that will have a huge impact on risk. So again, not exclusively risk, but we're just calling this out to make the point. I'm moving to something much more real time. So I have much more visibility and I have the ability to enforce that risk. If I know that there's risk in these systems, sensitive data that I don't want, or people are using data inadvertently, I can triage that, I can manage that, and then take that score. So this would be representative of a company. And if you go back to the level 1, level 2, level 3, remember we said level 2 was programmatic. This is a company that's just starting that journey away from programs into programmatic with that low 2 score, and then essentially moving through programmatic and being on the tail end with that almost 3.0 score, just about to bump into data stewardship. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully you see things that you can use in your own business, whether it's the framework or just the approach or some of the questions and some of the value statements. But I appreciate the time from everyone here and the conversation and the great questions that you all asked. And we actually do have some more time for a Q&A or any dialogue, anything that folks are curious about.
Great content. Thanks, Ben. Couple interesting things here in the chat if you want to comment. I love Steph was combining some of the quotes you were alluding to and said he likes this combo. Trust is like the air we breathe. When it's present, nobody really notices. When it's absent, everyone notices, which I think is so true.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
And way to yes and build on top of that one. So little improv in there. That's
totally.
great.
I love it. And then just sharing some challenges from, talking about those 5 categories of the assessment. Leonardo shared, like when it comes to technology, IT and security teams, figuring out privacy by design within applications in IT and security can be a big challenge for them.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it can be a challenge. And that's where, looking at some of these modern approaches, as I mentioned, gosh, instead of re-architecting the systems, is there a better way to take the consent signal and just flow it into those systems through, modern API approach? It's not a panacea, but it certainly helps. And it means that there's less manual activity we have to do, more resource, more time to maybe work on some of those more challenging aspects of making sure the tech stack has privacy by design and trust by design built in. So it's a very fair point, one we see often. So anything else out there or any questions from the crew?
I think that may be it from the group. And nothing really changed. Definitely got some more answers trickling in on both of those polls, but still ops and technology standing out as the big ones, and still collaboration is a work in progress for most people. Although 25% say it's great and they speak with marketing and IT regularly, which is awesome.
That's awesome. That warms my heart because it hasn't, we haven't always seen that. So that's directionally absolutely great to see.
Mm-hmm.
So. Well, thanks everyone. Should we wrap? What do we think?
I think so. I think we're quieted down. So I think that may be it. If we should hand it back to the GRC team, or are we wrapping here, Ben?
I think we're good. So we can hand it back to GRC just for to take us out.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So unfortunately, we're out of time today. I just want to say a huge thank you to our panelists for a very insightful discussion, and also to our audience for joining us today. We hope to see you all again soon. Just a final reminder for those wondering, the webinar will be available on demand on the grcworldforums.com website, and details sent via email. On behalf of GRC World Forums and our panel, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.